Hi, and welcome. My name is Ford for Caterpillar Cross Stitch, and this week I'm going to be sharing with you some of the biggest mistakes that I made when I first started cross stitching, so that hopefully you can avoid making them yourself. If you learn anything from me, take a moment to please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment. It doesn't cost you anything but a few seconds to do that, and it makes a really big difference for me, so I'd appreciate it if you would. So let's talk about mistakes that I made as a new stitcher. This isn't necessarily the first mistake that I made, but it's the one that I regret the most, and that is working from originals of my patterns. I used to make my own patterns on graph paper, one stitch at a time with colored pencils. And then one day, I left my bag in my car, and I was using a laptop bag to hold my stitching in because it was a great shape for it. Well, somebody saw that, assumed it was a laptop, broke into my car and stole it. So I assumed that they were extremely disappointed, but not as disappointed as I was because I didn't have copies of those patterns. So whether you're working from a print pattern from a magazine or from a pattern you made yourself or from a Caterpillar cross stitch pattern or a kit pattern, make sure that you have a copy of that. Usually what I will do if I'm working from an original pattern is I'll make a copy and I'll work from the copy so that I still have my original at home. This is totally legal to do for your own use. It's a working copy. You can absolutely do this. Another mistake that I made that cost me a lot of heartache later was not paying attention to the materials I was using when framing. I made a project that was just kind of a joke piece. I didn't think I was going to care about it when I was new, and I used duct tape to hold it into the frame instead of, an acid-free adhesive or something like that. And after a few years, I really fell in love with the hobby and I really cared about this piece. I pulled it out of the frame to look at it, and the adhesive from the glue had discolored almost all of the fabric. It was terrible. So make sure that even if you don't think you're going to be serious about it, someday that might be important to you. So use acid-free, archival, and photo-safe materials when framing your projects. Another mistake I made that I regretted later was taking requests. I was working on a project, it was a fairly big project, and somebody said, "Ooh, will you make me one too?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, 100%, I'd love to make you one." And then about 6 months later, as I'm slogging my way through and dragging my ass through this project, I really regretted having said yes to that. So these days, somebody asks me to make something, I say, "I'll teach you how to do it. I'll even help you get the supplies and find the right pattern, but I'm not going to make a project for you. I will make projects as presents for people if I'm 100% sure that they're going to like it, but otherwise, I just make projects for my own enjoyment." I want to take just a second now to remind you to sign up for the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Stitch Club email newsletter. You'll get all the latest news about what's going on with Caterpillar Cross Stitch, plus you'll get an ebook with 9 free PDF cross stitch patterns in it. One of those patterns is a year-long tracking pattern, mood tracker, temperature tracker, whatever you like. It's a really fun project. Hit the link down there in the description to get all of those great perks. A few of the mistakes that I used to make were related to the processes and the way that I stitched, and they affected the quality of my finished pieces. I learned better and I don't make these mistakes anymore, but it affected some of the pieces that I finished. One of those is that I didn't used to be very fastidious about washing my hands before I started working on my project. I figured, I'll wash it when I'm done and it'll be as good as new. But some of that staining on a couple of those projects, especially the ones on white and cotton Aida, did not really come out entirely, and you can see just a faint ghost of the hoop line. So now I always make sure to clean my hands thoroughly before I sit down to work on my project. Also, with one of my favorite projects, I made what I would now consider to be a very rookie mistake, and I was working up at an edge of the hoop that I was having trouble reaching, and I couldn't quite get to it. So I was like, I'll just turn the project so that I can more easily reach the spot that I need to work on. And if you've ever made this mistake yourself, you probably know where this is going. All of the stitches that I did with the project turned 90 degrees were crossed the wrong way. One of the first things you learn when you're trying to figure out how to make your stitches neater is to always cross your stitches in the same direction. This, and then this, or the opposite. You can do whichever order you prefer for the stitch that's on top, but you need to do it the same way throughout the project, or you'll have a weird texture and the light will hit it wrong and you won't be able to tell quite why it doesn't look very good, but it won't look very good. So if you're going to turn your project so that you can reach another part of it, turn it 180 degrees. Then your stitches will all still cross in the same order, but don't turn it 90 degrees like I did on my fractal piece and have regretted it ever since. And another mistake that I used to make was being too focused on what the back of the project looked like. When I'd been taught how to stitch, I'd been taught that you want all of your stitches to be 1 square high and vertical on the back of the project, so that you have all these nice, neat little rows of stitches on the back and all these nice, neat little X's of stitches on the front. And that is a shorthand for how to get good, even, consistent looking stitches. But there are a lot of circumstances where it's not ideal. When you're working on linen or when you're working on fabrics where the fibers are a little bit slidier, a tent stitch really works a lot better, and that looks very different on the back. Or if you're working in vertical columns, I found a way when I was doing this that I could go this way with this one and straight up, and then this way with this one, and then straight up, and then this way with this one, so that it made all those nice, neat little columns of stitches on the back, but because of the inconsistency of the direction of tension on the stitches, they didn't look very good on the front, and I didn't understand why, because I thought I was doing everything right. But I've since learned that the back of the project only matters insofar as it affects the front of the project. So I use different processes and I make different choices about what order I do stitches in order to make sure that they look good on the front, and I don't care so much about the back. A neat back is a side effect of most of those decisions that I make, but it's not the primary goal. Most of the mistakes that I made could easily have been avoided if I'd talked to somebody who knew what they were doing. Like members of the Caterpillar cross-stitch community, there's an amazing, knowledgeable, and supportive community that has sprung up around the Caterpillar cross-stitch brand, in the Facebook group and the following of the Instagram. Make sure you check both of those out so that you don't miss out on all of those years of wisdom that I could have availed myself of. The last few things that I used to do that I now consider mistakes are all sort of under one umbrella heading, and that's what I would call being cheap. Now, being cheap should not be confused with being frugal or thrifty. Being frugal or thrifty means not spending money that you don't need to. Being cheap means not spending money that you do need to. So I would do things like buy store brand floss, or buy that cheap Chinese floss that you can get on a certain global shipping website. That stuff is usually not as nice as the double mercerized cotton that DMC uses. It looks the same on the skein and the colors look the same, but it doesn't have a nice sheen to it and it gets fuzzy when you stitch it. It's just not the same quality. So I now only buy DMC floss. I know there are other good brands out there that other people are really loyal to. I just like DMC because it's widely available and because I'm very familiar with the colors, so I know what I can use there. Another way that I used to skimp that was a big mistake was buying store brand Aida at the craft store. The store brand that they sell at the craft store is not as good quality as stuff that you would get from DMC or Charles Craft or Zweigart or any of the other major cross-stitch fabric manufacturers. The problem that I had with those was I bought a really big piece of what was supposed to be 18 count Aida, and it was like a third the price of the Charles Craft stuff that was right next to it. So I was like, well, why would I buy this one when I can get this one and get more of it for a third of the price? And so I took it home and I stitched my project, and then I was about 3/4 of the way through the project when I started to notice that the circular element of my project, which was a major component of it, was a little more egg-shaped than circular. And I started looking closely and I realized that the fabric was not quite an even weave. It was not 18 count in both directions. I counted, measured an inch and counted, and it was about 19 count in one direction and about 15 count in the other. So it was nearly a 25% variation. So what should have been a circle was instead a very oval-shaped figure. And I was able to fix some of that by getting the fabric wet and stretching it in opposite direction, but it was so much work and it didn't totally quite work. So now I just don't skimp on the fabric. Buy good quality fabric from a manufacturer that you know. It's not worth the heartache of saving a little bit of money because your time is worth something. The time that you spend on a project has a value. So saving a little bit of money on the material, but creating a bunch of work for yourself is not worth it. Value your time a little bit. I used to buy the cheapest hoops I could find as well, and those would splinter and they would sometimes leave stains on my fabric, and so now I just make sure to buy good quality hoops from a brand that I know and respect. Another example of this is reusing floss. I had a project that I made a really big mistake on and I had to undo hundreds of stitches, and I pulled all of that floss out very carefully, saved it, wound it back onto the bobbin, and stitched with it again. All that friction, all that grinding, all that pulling, this floss got really fuzzy and it started leaving lint around, and it actually like colored dust broke free from it and ground into the surface of my fabric, and it was just a headache to get it to look good. Not worth it. Don't reuse floss after you pull it back out. Floss is very cheap, and again, your time is worth something. Similarly, playing floss chicken when you don't have to is a waste of your time and effort, but it saves fractions of a penny on floss. So just when you get down to anywhere near the length of the needle in floss left, just tie it off and start a new thread. You know, sometimes it's the last little bit and you don't have another skein and you just need to get a few more stitches out of it. Like, those are circumstances where those tips that I shared about how to win at floss chicken, which there should be a card popping up right here, those can be really handy when, say, it's a discontinued color, or it's just your last skein and it's Sunday night at 1 in the morning and there's nowhere to go get more and you really want to finish the project. Those kinds of circumstances make it worth it to play floss chicken, but just because you want to get a few extra stitches out of it, not worth it. Save your time, cut that floss, start a new one. And a similar mistake is one that I made with my very first project. I had a piece of Ada and I had a couple of projects in mind that I wanted to do with it, so I calculated how much space I could have for those, and I was like, I can squeeze one extra project out of this if I cut this a little bit smaller. If I bring it down to only an extra inch all the way around. An inch is plenty of space, I'm not going to get that close to it, I'm careful. Well, it created a lot of problems that I didn't foresee. Things like not being able to load the hoop very well with the project, and having to move the hoop around a lot, especially when I was in the corners, and not really having enough space to fit the project into a frame. So in fact, my very first cross-stitching project is still sitting in a drawer because I can't get it in a frame because I didn't leave myself enough space around the edges. So it seems kind of wasteful when somebody says, you know, leave 3 inches on each side all the way around. So like what should be a 6 by 6 project winds up being a 12 by 12 project. You're like, do I really need that much extra fabric? Yes, do yourself a favor, leave the extra fabric. The little bit of money that you will save by using the fabric more efficiently will waste a bunch of your time and effort and won't be worth it in the long run. So don't be cheap on that front. Give yourself the extra space like people recommend. So that covers most of the biggest mistakes that I made as a new stitcher that I would not make again today as a more experienced stitcher. What about you? Was there a big mistake that you made that you really regretted? Leave it in the comments. Maybe some other viewer can benefit from your wisdom. If you have a question or a topic that you'd like to see me cover, leave that in the comments as well, and I'll add it to my list of ideas. Other than that, I do want to thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, my name is Ford, and I will see you next week.